Welcome to a new episode of Whiplash Agile, where we focus on the failures that are necessary to be successful on an agile journey. Because there are always valuable lessons to be learned from someone else's struggles and stumbles. I'm Jeff Anderson, your host and CEO of Agile by Design. Scott, thanks for coming on board our first inaugural podcast for Whiplash Agile. It's good to have you here.
Oh, great to be here. Thanks, Jeff. Always good to hang out with you.
So I'm going to kick it off. Speaking of hanging out, I think the first time I met you was 2005, 2006?
Would have been around that time frame. Yes, a while ago.
Kind of scary, right? So I remember back then, I was just getting into the agile coaching and consulting thing. I was a recovering architect at the time. And you were already a well-known authority figure in agile way back then, but not just known for being in the agile space, but known for being critical of the agile space. I was wondering if you could tell me what drew you to agile in the first place. What also, kind of turned you off and what are some of the objections that you had, what you saw going on? So give you a bit of the good and the bad.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess it all goes back to the mid-90s. So I've been a public speaker and a writer since around then. And I was, a speaker with the software development conferences back in the day. And they were fantastic. So I was hanging out with, the Kent Becks of the world, the, Jim Highsmiths of the world. And literally half of the original 17 that, wrote the Agile Manifesto. And at the time, I was big into CMM at the time. And, I had, drunk that Kool-Aid and had a couple books out on the topic. And I went out for dinner once with Jim Highsmith, who, being a phenomenally polite gentleman, he basically walked me through why I was completely and utterly wrong, which I was. And that sort of was a wake-up call. Plus, I attended one of Kent Beck's first tutorials on extreme programming. So I started seeing all this stuff, and I also started seeing how the heavyweight software development stuff simply wasn't working. The wonderful theory, but in practice, it really left a lot to be desired. So I started working on unified process at the time, and as well as UML. And I started working in identifying really lightweight ways of modeling, which was very radical at the time. Ideas like using Post-it notes and whiteboards was, really sort of leading edge and antithetical to what was actually going on in the modeling community. And so then when the Agile Manifesto was published, it just struck a chord with me. And I started, and I published an article on Software Development Magazine about extreme modeling, which is how do you model on an extreme programming project. But then that quickly morphed into agile modeling, and then it worked out, and then documentation got thrown in as well.
That's one of your favorite works, even to this day, is the agile modeling method. It's just a breath of fresh air way back then.
It is, yeah. And I think I would argue, I'm obviously biased, but I think it doesn't get the credit it deserves. Myself and a few others really sort of fought the good fight back then and paved the way to a lot of the phenomenally common techniques that are available now and that are the norm now. So, so we definitely won. We won that battle over the long run. And I started working on the Agile data method as well, taking on these issues around how do you take an Agile approach to data management and data engineering and all these critical activities that were being ignored by the development community, and still in many ways it is ignored. You talk to a lot of developers, they say, well, I don't need to worry about database stuff because we just encapsulate access. Well, yeah, maybe, but somebody does need to worry about it. And because they're not worrying about it effectively and dealing with it effectively, this is probably why you have so much data technical debt, which is running you aground on your data warehousing efforts, data-driven decisions, and of course, artificial intelligence.
We're going to get into artificial intelligence in a second, because I think there's a fascinating overlap between what people are doing in the agile world and artificial intelligence. But before we do that, if you were to think of, let's call it the Agile verse today or whatever we want to call it and what it's morphed into, and think of some of the criticisms you had back then, how would you say Agile has evolved or devolved or anywhere in between right now? Do some of these criticisms still stand? Are there different criticisms?
The criticisms have expanded actually. So back in the day, early 2000s, I was very critical of the Scrum certification strategy. Show up for 2 days in a workshop, and as long as your check doesn't bounce, back in the day we had checks back then.
Yeah.
But if your check doesn't bounce, congratulations, you're a certified master. And at the time in the early days, a few dogs earned their CS or had their CSM bought for them. Dogs, like pets, and they had to put a rule in place to not certify pets anymore. And it's a true story. So the lean dog guys did it. So anyways,
I have to talk to these guys. That's amazing.
Yeah, I was very critical of this, dumbing down of Agile, because if you compare, extreme programming, which required significant skill and was hard to learn and hard to do, and required significant discipline to pull off, and then compare it to Scrum, which is let's run a few meetings and here's a few here's a few cheesy roles that you might want to play. Difference of night and day. And what happened was everybody jumped on the Scrum bandwagon because it was easy, right? It's easy, very easy cert. What's not to like about that? And people were being rewarded for having, their CSM and rewarded well. So, very little effort and suddenly you get a bump in salary. So, what's not to like? And the problem was that the heart of Agile, which was really all about how do we do small team software development effectively, was lost. And the challenge is it's very difficult to put a certification around something as challenging and requiring as much expertise as extreme programming does, and they didn't do it. They didn't get on that bandwagon, and so what happened is everything got dumbed down, and we see this today. So today, here we are 20 years later, and everybody's shocked that Agile coaches are struggling to find jobs now, and it's because there's all these people that took 2 entire days of training, might have been on 1 or 2 projects, and suddenly they're pitching themselves as an Agile coach. Well, that's just shame. That's not ethical. It simply isn't ethical. And what's happened is these organizations don't know who they're hiring. And what happened, and up until a couple of years ago, there was so much demand for Agile coaches, you could get away with this. Now what's happening, I think companies have clued in that they're not getting value from a lot of their coaches. And as a result, they're not hiring them anymore, and rightfully so. So the rate for coaches has dropped significantly, and I think it's because we didn't police that. There was no barrier to entry to become an Agile coach, and as a result, it just got watered down to the point of nothingness. And I think that's a real shame.
Do you think there's any way to reclaim the Agile coaching brand from where it is right now? Or do you feel like it's a lost cause and it's kind of time to move on and do other things or focus on it in another way?
It's pretty much a lost cause. I think there's definitely need for some form of coaching, some form of training and coaching and help. But until there's barriers to entry, until there is a way to vet these coaches and having a reasonable certification that's hard to earn and that means something, then we're never going to get there. And we also, I think we got too much into the touchy-feely stuff, and there's value in that. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, there's certainly value in emotional intelligence, all these good sorts of things. But you also need to have the skills that you're coaching people in, right? So if you want to be an Agile coach of a software development team, you darn well better know how to develop software, and you'd better be reasonably good at it, and you'd better understand your options. So, and the metaphor I like to use is one of a sports coach, right? So I've got a young daughter.
Yeah.
And if I wanted to, and right now she's learning a sport, but when so say she wanted to learn soccer, European football, when I don't know anything about European football other than, it's played on a field, they kick a ball around and you hit it in the net and you score. That's my level of knowledge.
Right.
But I could hire a soccer coach because I know I would expect them to have played soccer for many years. I would expect to hear a story about how maybe they worked their way up and then it didn't work out for them. Or maybe they were a professional player at one point, but now they're older and they're coaching, right? Or they blew out their knees. I want to hear a story like that. I want to see some experience of how they've coached before. They've coached teams. They're working their way up through the soccer coaching world, whatever that happens to be. And so I want to hear a story. I want to hear stories about that. And I want to see them how they're out in the field coaching kids to learn how to play soccer, right? So this is basic fundamental thinking. And yet, when it comes to companies hiring agile coaches, they just park their brains at the door. It's like they don't know enough to ask. So you want to get a job as an agile coach for a software team? How many years? And I would expect a decade or two of experience do you have on agile software teams, or at least software teams, if not agile teams? And if you don't have that, you shouldn't be coaching. Sorry.
It's kind of interesting because I do really respect that perspective, because I've seen what happens when you don't respect that perspective.
Yeah.
I've also had some good experience in bringing people in who are just incredibly willing to learn and learn fast, and incredibly willing to get deep within it. I was wondering what your perspective is. Is it that people don't have the experience, or they don't feel like the experience is even an expectation? Like they don't even feel like they need to learn it. So you'll get a scrum master or a coach on a team and they don't even think it's their job to understand the domain at all. Or
I think that's the problem. And I see that with project managers as well. I just a couple hours ago I had a discussion with some PMs who didn't appreciate my attitude that if you want to be a project manager of a software team, you'd better understand the fundamentals of software. And they go, well, what do you mean? I don't need to be technical. Yeah, you do. And because the techies won't listen to you. So anyways, you
won't be able to make the right decisions. And
you won't be able to make the right decisions. Yeah, exactly. So, and I think there's something to be said about fast learners and willing to learn. That's great. But it does take years to get good at software development. Because it's complex and there's intricacies and there are almost like laws of physics in the software world that you need to understand. And I ran into a team once that ran aground on Brooks's law. Brooks's law, for those of you who don't know, is you add somebody to a late software project, you make it later. And this was news. This was news to them. And it was one of the primary. They were in trouble anyways. They were going to fail no matter what. But they made the problem worse by adding people to the team in order to try to speed them up, and just many things like that. And so and software development is very, very fragile. And one or two bad mistakes will basically kill it. And I'm sure you've seen, I've been on efforts where pretty much on the first day you knew it was going to fail. First day.
Standing it up too fast, people don't know each other, maximizing how much, going fast before going slow, all that kind of good stuff. And you just look and go, oh no, here it comes.
Yeah. And, no investment in a little bit of upfront thinking, a little bit of planning, a little bit of architecture work, a little bit of requirements work. Kiss of death. And the weird thing is some of those ideas I just said go against what people are being certified in. And so it's so basic realities on the ground aren't being respected by what's getting taught in these certs. The little information is being taught in the certs.
So talk about your certs for a second, and some of the things that you think you're doing differently. So I'm thinking DAD specifically, basically some of the literature and frameworks that you brought to the table, and how do they differ from some of the other things that people might be looking through out there?
Yeah. So when I first led the development of agile modeling, I refused to do a cert because I was seeing the Scrum scam that was at the beginning of development. I was invited in the very early days, and I refused to do it. But many of us refused to do it because it was obviously not questionable at best. And so I refused to do that for agile modeling. That was probably a mistake, but I could have made a lot of money. And that wasn't really the issue, but it was more, I could have done a lot of good in the industry by putting together a reasonable certification that you had to earn. And, we wouldn't be in this position where we're in, where there's so many people who are anti-architecture and anti-modeling, anti-thinking.
And I think it's kind of left out with all this agile stuff in a lot of places anyway. So this could have been something that was for them. You could give them a path forward, I think. So.
Well, yeah, exactly. So, but anyway, so I didn't do that with Agile modeling. I certainly didn't do that with Agile data. And I'm not sure any sort of certification would have taken off in that space, because I don't think the data crowd's not really into that for the most part. But then with Disciplined Agile, first of all, Disciplined Agile Delivery, which we originally developed when I was at IBM. I led the development of it there, and Mark Lyons, my business, who eventually became my business partner and co-author of the first Dad book, and huge contributor into the overall toolkit. We didn't put a certification around that because I was anti-cert. I just didn't believe in certification, and still sort of struggle with it. But as long as if you're learning good stuff and you've got to earn the cert, then I'm fairly happy with it. And I don't have to agree with the material you're learning. I would prefer to agree with the material, but if you have to earn, like I'm looking in certifications, did you do something to actually earn it, or did you just buy it? And most of the Agile certs you buy, and the people behind them, they spin these stories. But at the end of the day, attending a workshop for a couple of days and then passing a test that virtually nobody fails, that's not really, you're not doing much to earn your cert. And I'm sorry if you disagree with that, but it's.
Sorry, would you consider earning to be like real work in the field as an example of earning, or what are some?
Yeah, like real work in the field, or a multi-month effort to earn the cert. So maybe you do some training, then you do some work, more training, more work. Maybe you get tested. Maybe you have to do interviews with people who are a higher level up than the certification scheme. All that good sort of stuff. And the problem is that's hard to scale, which is why people don't want to. The people running certifications really prefer to avoid those sorts of things. But so with Disciplined Agile, we really didn't want to run a cert program. But then, I left IBM. I formed Scott Ambler and Associates with Mark Lyons, which then got reworked to Disciplined Agile Inc. And around probably 2015, 2016, it was becoming blatantly obvious that if we didn't have a certification program for DA, that we were in trouble. And because people just want it, they expect, nobody wants to buy an Agile class anymore if they don't get some cert. Right. That's how bad it's gotten in this industry. And so we had to do that. But I wouldn't just give people certs just because they, you've got a heartbeat. Okay, congratulations, you're certified. You got to actually earn it. So we put together a fairly hard cert program. And it was, the first level was fairly easy to get in, but anything meaningful, you really, you had to have several years of experience and between certs, right? As well as just in general. And you had to pass a really hard test and so on. So to get up to the coaching cert, you had to know your stuff. You had to pass the lower level certs, but you also had to get interviewed, and where we would give you very hard, reasonably hard challenges from the field, often what is things that we were dealing with clients at the present moment. Because it's always good to get a second opinion as to how to address an issue. But and then we put you through the paces, and not everybody passed those interviews. Some people had to come back, 6 months, a year, 2 years later, and train again. So, and that was the other thing too. I want to see a failure rate, like a significant failure rate. So we were on the tests, we were running about an 80% pass rate, initial pass rate, and
that's
on the first semester. Yeah. And then it was interesting though. We had a much higher success rate on the next level test, which was much harder. But we had already trained people. When we say this is a real test, it's a real test. And it was interesting. A lot of the Scrum people would get nailed the first time on the test because they had no concept of a real test. And oh my God, I had to know the material. Yeah, you do. Yeah, sorry, you're not. I get a cert if you don't know the material. And so anyway, so we had to make it real, and we did. And then PMI bought us in 2019, and then they have their certification process. But their certification process is pretty solid. You might not agree with everything they do, but when somebody's certified from PMI, it means something, right?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
have to have experience. So I'm going to ask one more dad-related question, and then we're going to go on to the topic of AI. How would you differentiate dad from the way other frameworks are scaled in terms of its openness, in terms of its, we both, you know where I'm getting at. We both have a similar opinion when it comes to fixed methodologies as a way to increase agility. Talk about how dad's a little bit different from that approach.
Yeah, definitely. So DA, Disciplined Agile is a toolkit. It's not a framework. It's not a method. And so what I mean by that is that it's generative. You use it to choose your own way of working. We make some suggestions, but nothing is prescriptive. So where you have other frameworks like Scrum and SAFe and others, where they have one way of doing things, that's prescriptive. Those are, well-defined, prescriptive ways of going about it. And there's like wonderful marketing rhetoric for why they're not prescriptive. But I invite people to look up the definition of the word prescription and then tell me that they're not prescriptive. But anyways, so DA is not prescriptive. We did that on purpose, and the reason why is when we first started developing the approach at IBM. Well, first of all, I did not ever, when I joined IBM, I was pretty clear to them I did not ever want to develop another method. I've been there, done that, no longer interested. So I was sort of dragged into the development of DA. And but what happened, it was based on two observations. First was that people needed help. They needed some guidance as to how to choose their own way of working. But they also had the issue that everybody was working differently. Everybody's in a different situation, so context really counts. And this is phenomenally easy to observe if you choose to, that everybody works differently. So how do you define a method?
What would you say to people who say that no, it's the same and we just need one standard approach? And what do you mean it's different? That doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. And usually when I hear that nonsense, I instantaneously start asking questions like, really, so you expect a team of 5 people to work differently than a team to work the exact same as a team of 50? Your marketing team is going to work the same as as a software team, and so on. A team that's globally distributed will work the same as a team that's in the same room. Come on, give me a break, right? So you can very easily shoot down that just ignorant nonsense when it gets down to it. But it's a belief system. They've got their belief system, and in reality, generally doesn't come into play. But that's okay. So it took us a while to figure it out, but we realized instead of telling people what to do, we had to tell them here's what you need to think about. So when you're worried about requirements, or you're worried about architecture or governance or programming or whatever, here are the issues you need to think about. Here are options to address each one of these issues. And here are the trade-offs of those options. Because I don't know anything about you or your situation, I can't tell you what to do. Unlike the people behind the prescriptive methods who are so arrogant, they think they can tell you what to do. I'm not going to do that. Instead, I tell you what to think about, and I help you make better choices. So I want to put you in a position where you can choose the strategy that's best for you. And so Disciplined Agile is really a hybrid. So the name is wrong. It should be like Disciplined Hybrid or something, but it came out of Agile. But it includes very traditional strategies, lean strategies, Agile strategies. Because I don't know what you're doing, I don't know what your situation is. So so sometimes a very traditional strategy might be the most appropriate thing for what you're trying to achieve right now, and that's okay, right? Choose wisely. And I think this is the challenge in the Agile community, particularly with these coaches, is that because they don't have the experience to back up their title, they start spouting nonsense like, well, let's fail fast. Let's just make crap up. We'll experiment with it because I don't know what I'm doing. So we're going to make up some ideas and we're going to experiment and we're going to fail fast, and that's okay because we're actually learning. We're not failing. No, you're still failing. And you don't need to fail as often as you do because you're facing challenges that many other people before you have faced. So why not leverage their learnings as opposed to wasting all this time making the same learnings again, right? It's absolutely crazy. But this is the problem when you have all these inexperienced coaches. the best they can do is to fail fast, and they'll fail fast a lot.
Or rely on a framework without reasing why the framework works or doesn't. And then
just blindly follow
success.
Follow the recipe.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with that. It's interesting how the open-ended new ways of working approach really, I think Disciplined Agile is one of the few offerings out there that's managed to hit some scale with it. Kanban method's probably another one, but the scale almost gets dwarfed by the adoption rate of things like Scrum and Safe. Let's hope that kind of turns around as people see the evidence and the outcome and the outputs, and maybe some of this noise gets.
I hope so. I think that one thing I've known, so PMI has a marketing challenge on their hands, but one of the things that I've noticed is that because the Scrum and the Safe, like all these prescriptive methods are so prevalent, and this fail fast, we're in a unique situation, therefore we need to fail fast attitude is so prevalent. All these coaches and these practitioners can't even imagine that somebody else has figured this out and can provide advice. Like it's a shock. I've run into a lot of experienced people who then would take training with me, and then at the end of the first day, they invariably they'd come up to me and they say, "Oh my God, I can't believe that there's so many things that we're struggling with Scrum, and not only do you have solutions, you've got multiple solutions, and you can tell us the trade-offs. We had no idea. Like, we've been struggling with this one problem for months, and you gave me 4 different ways of approaching it."
They're making it up from scratch without any looking at the fact.
Yeah, and it was like there's no failing fast. There's no making crap up. It was just, I just happened to have invested time to learn my trade. That can put things into context for you.
Amazing. Let's switch tracks a little bit. I know you've been up to something quite different. I wouldn't say quite different, but it's a new kind of passion focus of yours, which is artificial intelligence. First of all, start with maybe telling us why you where that's coming from and why you've gotten so involved in this, and where do you see the overlap in terms of Agile in general, and how could AI help Agile practitioners?
Yeah, definitely. So when I left PMI, 2 summers ago, I was sort of looking around for something to do, and I was sort of stumbled into AI, and this was about a month or two just before ChatGPT 3 came out, and all the big hullabaloo there. So it looks as if I'm jumping on the bandwagon, but I'm really not. But anyways, be that as it may. And so I went back to school to earn a master's degree in AI. And some of it is to leverage my data background, because I've got a deep background in data, and data quality really, is a passion. And data quality is this very serious issue in AI. And I started attending online AI conferences. And it was interesting. I was seeing like these fantastic speakers, and invariably, like roughly a third of them would be, they'd be speaking along, blah, 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 is what we're doing. And data quality is a really big problem. Somebody should do something about that. And that was the level of their advice. Somebody needs to do something about it. And invariably, like literally a third of these speakers.
Data background necessarily, right? So
yeah, well, they don't. Yeah, that's the problem, right? So they're all doing data cleansing and complaining about it, and rightfully so. But somebody really does need to sort of address this problem and do something about it. So anyway, so I've been in school now for a little over a year and having a great time, and learning a lot of good stuff. But I've been sharing what I've been learning and doing a little bit of consulting on the side as well. And I've noticed that there isn't great advice for how do you run an AI initiative. So you're at the Royal Bank of Canada. How does the Royal Bank of Canada run an AI project? And it's not really a project; it's an initiative.
No, you just need sprints, and you're good to go.
Yeah, you just need sprints, and that's it. Yeah. So the problem is you need the answer is you need a hybrid approach, right? You've got to do some upfront thinking. There are phases. It is iterative. You're gonna release multiple models into production. There'll be feedback. You'll learn stuff. You've got to re-release and so on, right? So it's not a project. It's not purely agile. It's agile and lean, but there's also some traditional stuff in there as well. And you darn well better respect that. So I think certainly the predictive serial approaches will have a success rate of roughly 0, but if you take a pure agile approach, you're going to run it around as well, because you're not going to be doing the modeling you need. You're not going to be doing the exploration that you need, and so on. So I think there's a lot of stuff going on there, and then there's all the data stuff, and that I think is what's really sort of catching organizations up, because they've allowed their data technical debt to grow over the years, and now they're really running around, and they got to pay the data piper.
There's it's a technical debt, isn't there? Right? So
yeah, and there's nothing you can do now. You've got to fix it. Period. So there's a lot of interesting implications of that. So anyway, so this is what I'm going to be focusing on, like leveraging the Agile data, particularly the Agile data material for AI, because I think there's just a huge need for somebody to have a coherent strategy for organizations.
That's really interesting. So in a way, I didn't even think that's kind of direction you're going to take this. So if I'm hearing you, it's take all that. And by the way, I've read Agile Data. I've read most of your books, by the way. I read the Agile Data book, and I feel like that's one of those tombs that is in the back of the shelf when it should be in the front of everybody's shelf, because it tells you how to refactor databases, how to evolve your data structures gracefully over time. So if I hear you, you're going to take some of that material and try to get it to have some more prominence, so that you can help actually these large AI initiatives clean up their data, so that we can actually get some meaningful common sense out of all the great services that are coming out of all these things.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, it was interesting. All the material from the Agile Database Technique book is published now, and it has been updated since it was published at agiledata.org. So it's all there, freely available, plus more, of course. But the Refactoring Databases book, which came out after that, was recently given an award, sort of an award, internally at ThoughtWorks, is what I heard, and it was nominated as the most underappreciated book in software engineering, and sadly I've got to agree with that, because it really is the key to improving data quality, to improve your data sources at the source, and it's written from the point of view of a production database.
Yeah.
So and that's exactly what people have got to fix, and that's what all these organizations are struggling with. So if you really want to figure it out, Google refactoring databases.
So are we going to see the equivalent of Agile Data as an Agile AI, and perhaps some advice on order of operations, flow of work, kind of models you need to look at, how to do that in a more iterative and agile way? Is that something that's going to be part of what's coming out of Scott Ambler?
There's already a lot of great material about that, but it's oriented towards hardcore developers. But yeah, I recently published an article overviewing a machine learning life cycle, from beginning to end, and then back again because it's iterative. But I think there's more need for that. But certainly, I've also been working on data quality, explaining data quality techniques, and more importantly, how to choose the data quality techniques. So just like in Disciplined Agile, we described how to choose techniques in general. When you focus in on a narrow domain like data quality, you can start getting really specific about, here are the factors you really need to be thinking about, and here's when you need to think about them. So I've basically narrowed it down to 5 factors, arguably 6, but I talk about 5. And I say, so here's the 5 factors I would look at, and then here's where combinations of those factors matter, because you need to choose the right strategy for the right point in the life cycle for the situation that you find yourself in. So depending on where you're in the life cycle, some factors are more important than others. And as a result, some technique, depending on the technique, some techniques are better given a combination of 2 factors than, same techniques with a combination of another 2 factors. So you really want to choose intelligently. And it's interesting, so there's no best practices, of course, and there's no
one way to
there's no one way to do it. There's no magic bullet, other than you really do need to know what you're doing, and you need to make decisions and tailor your way of working to the situation that you face. And if you're not willing to do that, you're going to run aground. It's as simple as that.
Well, that's really good advice. I think that's something that anybody who's interested in new ways of working and new ways of thinking should adopt. We're just about out of time. Is there anything that you wanted to, talk through, or, anything you want to point people towards if they want to learn more about all this great stuff that you're doing?
Yeah. So, drop by scottambler.com. I blog regularly there. I also, post articles at agiledata.org, agilemodeling.com, and ambisoft.com. But if you go to the Scott Ambler site, it then links to those other sites. But if you're interested in particularly in the data issues, agiledata.org is something you probably want to bookmark.
Well, I'm certainly going to take a look. You've opened my, I didn't expect you to go in some of these directions, and now I'm like thinking through it. I'm like, there's some really interesting avenues to go explore on my own. So I'm looking forward to that, and I got a lot out of this podcast. I want to thank you a lot for joining us and help us start this new series of the bang.
Yeah. Oh, my pleasure.
Thanks again for joining me on Whiplash Agile. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a single episode. If you want to connect with me, join me on LinkedIn or Twitter/X. And if you like what you hear, or especially if you don't like what you hear, get in touch with me directly at agilebydesign.com.